Hello, everyone. How are we doing on this fine and lovely Friday? I hope quite well. The sun is shining. It's a lovely day outside. And I am here with another chapter of The Legend of Drizzt for you guys. So, there's not much to say except it's Friday. I will not be doing any over the weekend, so I'll be back on Monday. And this is going to be the beginning of part 2 to the book, which is entitled The Weapons Master. So it's the next stage in Drizzt's life that we're moving into now. Yesterday we saw him as a 10-year-old kind of being, or was he? I think he was between 5 and 10, probably. And he was being trained by his sister Vierna in different ways of the drow, specifically in this moment, his inherent ability of levitation. So, that's where we're at now, and we're going to hop in with another little bit of a time jump here. You'll see what I mean as soon as we get into it. So, here we go. Part 2, The Weapons Master. Empty hours, empty days. I find that I have few memories of that first period of my life. Those first 16 years when I labored as a servant. Minutes blended into hours, hours into days, and so on, until the whole of it seemed one long and barren moment. Several times I managed to sneak out onto the balcony of House Do'Urden and look out over the magical lights of Menzoberranzan. On all of those secret journeys I found myself entranced by the growing and dissipating heat light of Narbondel, the time clock pillar. Looking back on that now, on those long hours watching the glow of the wizard's fire slowly walk its way up and down the pillar, I'm amazed at the emptiness of my early days. I clearly remember my excitement, tingling excitement, each time I got out of the house and set myself into position to observe the pillar. Such a simple thing it was, yet so fulfilling compared to the rest of my existence. Whenever I hear the crack of a whip, another memory, more a sensation than a memory actually, sends a shiver through my spine. The shocking jolt and ensuing numbness from those snake-headed weapons is not something that any person would soon forget. They bite under your skin, sending waves of magical energy through your body, waves that make your muscles snap and pull beyond their limits. Yet I was luckier than most. My sister Vierna was near to becoming a high priestess when she was assigned the task of rearing me, and was at a period in her life where she possessed far more energy than such a job required. Perhaps, then, there was more to those first 10 years under her care than I now recall. Vierna never showed the intense wickedness of our mother, or more particularly of our oldest sister Breeza. Perhaps there were good times in the solitude of that house chapel. It is possible that Vierna allowed a more gentle side of herself to show through to her baby brother. Maybe not. Even though I count Vierna as the kindest of my sisters, her words drip in the venom of Lolth as surely as those of any cleric in Menzoberranzan. It seems unlikely that she would risk her aspirations toward high priestesshood for the sake of a mere child, a mere male child. Whether there were indeed joys in those years obscured in the unrelenting assault of Menzoberranzan's weakness, or whether that earliest period of my life was even more painful than the years that followed, so painful that my mind hides the memories, I cannot be certain. For all my efforts, I cannot remember them. I have more insight into the next 6 years, but the most prominent recollection of the days I spent serving the court of Matron Malice, aside from the secret trips outside the house, is the image of my own feet. A page prince is never allowed to raise his gaze. Drizzt Do'Urden. Chapter 6, Two Hands. Drizzt promptly answered the call to his matron mother's side, not needing the whip Breeza used to hurry him along. How often he had felt the sting of that dreaded weapon. Drizzt held no thoughts of revenge against his vicious oldest sister. With all of the conditioning he had received, he feared the consequences of striking her, or any female, far too much to entertain such notions. "Do you know what this day marks?" Malice asked him, as he arrived at the side of her great throne in the chapel's darkened anteroom. "No, matron mother," Drizzt answered, unconsciously keeping his gaze on his toes. A resigned sigh rose in his throat as he noticed the unending view of his own feet. There had to be more to life than blank stone and 10 wiggling toes, he thought. He slipped one foot out of his low boot and began doodling on the stone floor. Body heat left discernible tracings in the infrared spectrum, and Drizzt was quick and agile enough to complete simple drawings before the initial lines had cooled. 16 years, Matron Malice said to him. You have breathed the air of Menzoberranzan for 16 years. An important period of your life has passed. Drizzt did not react, did not see any importance or significance to the declaration. His life was an unending and unchanging routine. One day, 16 years, what difference did it make? If his mother considered important the things he had been put through since his earliest recollections, Drizzt shuddered to think of what the next decades might hold. He had nearly completed his picture of a round-shouldered drow, Briza, being bitten on the behind by an enormous viper. Look at me, Matron Malice commanded. Drizzt felt at a loss. His natural tendency once had been to look upon a person with who he was talking, but Briza had wasted no time in beating that instinct out of him. The place of a page prince was servitude, and the only eyes a page princes were worthy of meeting were those of the creatures that scurried along the stone floor. Except the eyes of a spider, of course. Drizzt had to avert his gaze whenever one of the 8-legged things crawled into his vision. Spiders were too good for the likes of a page prince. Look at me, Malice said again, her tone hinting of volatile impatience. Drizzt had witnessed the explosions before, a wrath so incredibly vile that it swept aside anything and everything in its path. Even Briza, so pompous and cruel, ran for hiding when the matron mother grew angry. Drizzt forced his gaze up tentatively, scanning his mother's black robes, using the familiar spider pattern along the garment's back and sides to judge the angle of his gaze. He fully expected, as every inch passed, a smack on his head or a lashing on his back. Briza was behind him, always with her snake-headed whip near her anxious hand. Then he saw her, the mighty matron Drizzt Do'Urden, her heat-sensing eyes flashing red, and her face cool, not flushed with angry heat. Drizzt kept tense, still expecting a punishing blow. Your tenure as page prince is ended, Malice explained. You are second boy of House Do'Urden now, and are accorded all the... Drizzt's gaze unconsciously slipped back to the floor. Look at me! His mother screamed in sudden rage. Terrified, Drizzt snapped his gaze back to her face, which now was glowing a hot red. On the edge of his vision, he saw the wavering heat of Malice's swinging hand, though he was not foolish enough to try to dodge the blow. He was on the floor then, the side of his face bruised. Even in the fall, though, Drizzt was alert and wise enough to keep his gaze locked onto that of Matron Malice. No more a servant! The matron mother roared. To continue acting like one would bring disgrace to our family. She grabbed Drizzt by the throat and dragged him roughly to his feet. If you dishonor House Do'Urden, she promised, her face an inch from his, I will put needles into your purple eyes. Drizzt didn't blink. In the 6 years since Vierna had relinquished control of him, putting him into general servitude to all of the family, he had come to know Matron Malice well enough to understand all of the subtle connotations of her threats. She was his mother, for whatever that was worth, but Drizzt did not doubt that she would enjoy sticking needles in his eyes. This one is different, Vierna said, in more than the shade of his eyes. In what way, then? Zaknafein asked, trying to keep his curiosity at a professional level. Zak had always liked Vierna better than the others, but she recently had been ordained a high priestess and had since become too eager for her own good. Vierna slowed the pace of her gait. The door to the chapel's antechamber was in sight now. It is hard to say, she admitted. Drizzt is as intelligent as any male child I have ever known. He could levitate by the age of 5. Yet after he became the page prince, it took 10 days of punishment to teach him the duty of keeping his gaze to the floor, as if such a simple act ran unnaturally counter to his constitution. Zaknafein paused and let Vierna move ahead of him. Unnatural, he whispered under his breath, considering the implications of Vierna's observations. Unusual, perhaps, for a drow, but exactly what Zaknafein would expect, and hope for, from a child of his loins. He moved behind Vienna into the lightless anteroom. Malice, as always, sat in her throne at the head of the spider idol, but all the other chairs in the room had been moved to the walls, even though the entire family was present. This was to be a formal meeting, Zack realized, for only the matron mother was accorded the comfort of a seat. "Matron Malice," Vienna began in her most reverent voice, "I present to you Zaknafein, as you requested." Zack moved up beside Vienna and exchanged nods with Malice, but he was more intent on the youngest Do'Urden, standing naked to the waist at the matron mother's side. Malice held up one hand to silence the others, then motioned for Briza, holding a house piwakwi, to continue. An expression of elation brightened Drizzt's childish face, as Briza, chanting through the appropriate incantations, placed the magical cloak, black and shot with streaks of purple and red, over his shoulders. "Greetings, Zaknafein Do'Urden," Drizzt said heartily, drawing stunned looks from all in the room. Matron Malice had not granted him privilege to speak. He hadn't even asked her permission. "I am Drizzt, second boy of House Do'Urden, no more the page prince. I can look at you now. I mean at your eyes and not your boots. Mother told me so." Drizzt's smile disappeared when he looked up at the burning scowl of Matron Malice. Vienna stood as if turned to stone, her jaw hanging open and her eyes wide in disbelief. Zack, too, was amazed, but in a different manner. He brought a hand up to pinch his lips together, to prevent them from spreading into a smile that would have inevitably erupted into belly-shaking laughter. Zack couldn't remember the last time he had seen the matron mother's face so very bright. Briza, in her customary position behind Malice, fumbled with her whip, too confounded by her young brother's actions to even know what in the nine hells she should do. This was a first, Zack knew, for Malice's eldest daughter rarely hesitated when punishment was in order. At the matron's side, but now prudently a step farther away, Drizzt quieted and stood perfectly still, biting down on his bottom lip. Zack could see, though, that the smile remained in the young drow's eyes. Drizzt's informality and disrespect of station had been more than an unconscious slip of the tongue, and more than the innocence of inexperience. The weapons master took a long step forward to deflect the matron mother's attention from Drizzt. "Second boy?" he asked, sounding impressed, both for the sake of Drizzt's swelling pride and to placate and distract Malice. "Then it is time for you to train." Malice let her anger slip away, a rare event. "Only the basics at your hand, Zaknafein. If Drizzt is to replace Nalfine, his place at the academy will be in Sorcerer. Thus, the bulk of his preparation will fall upon Risen and his knowledge, limited though it may be, of the magical arts." "Are you so certain that wizardry is his lot, matron?" Zack was quick to ask. "He appears intelligent," Malice replied. She shot an angry glare at Drizzt. "At least some of the time. Vienna reported great progress with his command of the innate powers. Our house needs a new wizard." Malice snarled reflexively, reminded of Matron Bainry's pride in her wizard son, the archmage of the city. It had been 16 years since Malice's meeting with the first matron mother of Menzoberranzan, but she had never forgotten even the tiniest detail of their encounter. "Sorcerer seems the natural course." Zack took a flat coin from his neck purse, flipped it into a spin, and snatched it out of the air. "Might we see?" he asked. "As you will," Malice agreed, not surprised at Zack's desire to prove her wrong. Zack placed little value in wizardry, preferring the hilt of a blade to the crystal rod component of a lightning bolt. Zack moved to stand before Drizzt and handed him the coin. "Flip it." Drizzt shrugged, wondering what this vague conversation between his mother and the weapons master was all about. Until now, he had heard nothing of any future profession being planned for him, or of this place called Sorcerer. With a consenting shrug of his shoulders, he slid the coin onto his curled index finger and snapped it in the air with his thumb, easily catching it. He then held it back out to Zack and gave the weapons master a confused look, as if to ask what was so important about such an easy task. Instead of taking the coin, the weapons master pulled another from his neck purse. "Try both hands," he said to Drizzt, handing it to him. Drizzt shrugged again, and in one easy motion put the coins up and caught them. Zack turned an eye on Matron Malice. Any drow could have performed that feat, but the ease with which this one executed the catch was a pleasure to observe. Keeping a sly eye on the matron, Zack produced 2 more coins. "Stack 2 on each hand and send all 4 up together," he instructed Drizzt. 4 coins went up. 4 coins were caught. The only parts of Drizzt's body that had even flinched were his arms. "2 hands," Zack said to Malice. "This one is a fighter. He belongs in melee Magthea." "I have seen wizards perform such feats," Malice retorted, not pleased by the look of satisfaction on the troublesome weapons master's face. Zack once had been Malice's proclaimed husband, and quite often since that distant time she took him as her lover. His skills and agility were not confined to the use of weapons. But along with the pleasures that Zaknafein gave to Malice, sensual skills that had prompted Malice to spare Zack's life on more than a dozen occasions, came a multitude of headaches. He was the finest weapons master in Menzoberranzan, another fact that Malice could not ignore, but his disdain, even contempt for the Spider Queen, had often landed House Do'Urden into trouble. Zack handed 2 more coins to Drizzt. Now enjoying the game, Drizzt put them into motion. 6 went up, 6 came down, the correct 3 landing in each hand. "2 hands," Zack said more emphatically. Matron Malice motioned for him to continue, unable to deny the grace of her youngest son's display. "Could you do it again?" Zack asked Drizzt. With each hand working independently, Drizzt soon had the coins stacked atop his index fingers, ready to flip. Zack stopped him there and pulled out 4 more coins, building each of the piles 5 high. Zack paused a moment to study the concentration of the young drow, and also to keep his hands over the coins and ensure they were brightened enough by the warmth of his body heat for Drizzt to properly see them in their flight. "Catch them all, second boy," he said in seriousness. "Catch them all, or you will land in Sorcerer, the School of Magic. That is not where you belong." Drizzt still had only a vague idea of what Zack was talking about, but he could tell from the weapons master's intensity that it must be important. He took a deep breath to steady himself, then snapped the coins up. He sorted their glow quickly, discerning each individual item. The first 2 fell easily into his hands, but Drizzt saw that the scattering pattern of the rest would not drop them so readily in line. Drizzt exploded into action, spinning a complete circle, his hands an indecipherable blur of motion. Then he straightened suddenly and stood before Zack. His hands were in fists at his sides, and a grim look lay on his face. Zack and Matron Malice exchanged glances, neither quite sure of what had happened. Drizzt held his fists out to Zack and slowly opened them, a confident smile widening across his childish face. 5 coins in each hand. Zack blew a silent whistle. It had taken him, the weapons master of the house, a dozen tries to complete that maneuver with 10 coins. He walked over to Matron Malice. 2 hands, he said a third time. "He is a fighter, and I am out of coins." "How many could he do?" Malice breathed, obviously impressed in spite of herself. "How many could we stack?" Zaknafein shot back with a triumphant smile. Matron Malice chuckled out loud and shook her head. She had wanted Drizzt to replace Nalfine as the house wizard, but her stubborn weapons master had, as always, deflected her course. "Very well, Zaknafein," she said, admitting her defeat. "The second boy is a fighter." Zack nodded and started back to Drizzt. "Perhaps one day soon to be the weapons master of House Do'Urden," Matron Malice added to Zack's back. Her sarcasm stopped Zack short, and he eyed her over the shoulder. "With this one," Matron Malice continued wryly, wrenching back the upper hand with her usual lack of shame, "could we expect anything less?" Risen, the present patron of the family, shifted uncomfortably. He knew, and so did everyone, even the slaves of House Do'Urden, that Drizzt was not his child. 3 rooms? Drizzt asked when he and Zack entered the large training hall at the southernmost end of the Do'Urden complex. Balls of multicolored magical light had been spaced along the length of the high-ceilinged stone room, basking the entirety in a comfortably dim glow. The hall had only 3 doors, one to the east, which led to an outer chamber that opened onto the balcony of the house, one directly across from Drizzt on the south wall, leading to the last room in the house, and the one from the main hallway that they had just passed through. Drizzt knew from the many locks Zack was now fastening behind them that he wouldn't often be going back that way. 1 room, Zack corrected. But 2 more doors, Drizzt reasoned, looking out across the room. With no locks. Ah, Zak corrected. Their locks are made of common sense. Drizzt was beginning to get the picture. That door, Zak continued, pointing to the south, opens to my private chambers. You do not ever want me to find you in there. The other one leads to the tactics room, reserved for times of war. When, if you ever prove yourself to my satisfaction, I might invite you to join me there. That day is years away, so consider this single magnificent hall. He swept his arm out in a wide arc. Your home. Drizzt looked around, not overly thrilled. He had dared to hope that he had left this kind of treatment behind him with his page prince days. This setup, though, brought him back even to before his 6 years of servitude in the house, back to that decade when he had been locked away in the family chapel with Vierna. This room wasn't even as large as the chapel, and it was too tight for the likings of the spirited young drow. His next question came out as a growl. Where do I sleep? Your home, Zak answered matter-of-factly. Where do I take meals? Your home. Drizzt's eyes narrowed to slits, and his face flushed in glowing heat. Where do I... He began stubbornly, determined to foil the weapons master's logic. Your home, Zak replied in the same measured and weighted timbre, before Drizzt could finish the thought. Drizzt planted his feet firmly and crossed his arms over his chest. It sounds messy, he growled. It had better not be, Zak growled back. Then what is the purpose? Drizzt began. You pull me away from my mother, you will address her as Matron Malice, Zak warned. You will always address her as Matron Malice. From my mother? Zak's next interruption came not with words, but with the swing of a curled fist. Drizzt awoke about 20 minutes later. First lesson, Zak explained, casually leaning against the wall a few feet away. For your own good, you will always address her as Matron Malice. Drizzt rolled to one side and tried to prop himself up on his elbow, but found his head reeling as soon as it left the black-rugged floor. Zak grabbed him and hoisted him up. Not as easy as catching coins, the weapons master remarked. What? Parrying a blow. What blow? Just agree, you stubborn child. Second boy, Drizzt corrected, his voice again a growl and his arms defiantly back over his chest. Zak's fist curled at his side, a not too subtle point that Drizzt did not miss. Do you need another nap? The weapons master asked calmly. Second boys can be children, Drizzt wisely conceded. Zak shook his head in disbelief. This was going to be interesting. You may find your time here enjoyable, he said, leading Drizzt over to a long, thick, and colorfully, though most of the colors were somber, decorated curtain. But only if you can learn some control over that wagging tongue of yours. A sharp tug sent the curtain floating down, revealing the most magnificent weapons rack the young drow, and many older drow as well, had ever seen. Pole arms of many sorts, swords, axes, hammers, and every other kind of weapon Drizzt could imagine, and a whole bunch he'd never imagine, sat in an elaborate array. Examine them, Zak told him. Take your time and your pleasure. Learn which ones sit best in your hands. Follow most obediently the commands of your will. By the time we have finished, you will know every one of them as a trusted companion. Wide-eyed, Drizzt wandered along the rack, viewing the whole place and the potential of the whole experience in a completely different light. For his entire young life, 16 years, his greatest enemy had been boredom. Now, it appeared, Drizzt had found weapons to fight that enemy. Zak headed for the door to his private chamber, thinking it better that Drizzt be alone in those first awkward minutes of handling new weapons. The weapons master stopped, though, when he reached his door and looked back to the young Do'Urden. Drizzt swung a long and heavy halberd, a polearm more than twice his height, in a slow arc. For all of Drizzt's attempts to keep the weapon under control, its momentum spun his tiny frame right to the ground. Zak heard himself chuckle, but his laughter only reminded him of the grim reality of his duty. He would train Drizzt as he had trained 1,000 young dark elves before him to be a warrior, preparing him for the trials of the academy and life in dangerous Menzoberranzan. He would train Drizzt to be a killer. How against this one's nature that mantle seemed, thought Zak. Smiles came too easily to Drizzt. The thought of him running a sword through the heart of another living being revolted Zaknafein. That was the way of the drow, though. a way that Zak had been unable to resist for all of his 4 centuries of life. Pulling his stare from the spectacle of Drizzt at play, Zak moved into his chamber and shut the door. "Are they all like that?" he asked into his nearly empty room. "Do all drow children possess such innocence, such simple, untainted smiles that cannot survive the ugliness of our world?" Zak started for the small desk at the side of the room, meaning to lift the darkening shade off the continually glowing ceramic globe that served as the chamber's light source. He changed his mind as that image of Drizzt's delight with the weapons refused to diminish, and he headed instead for the large bed across from the door. "Or are you unique, Drizzt Do'Urden?" he continued as he fell onto the cushioned bed. "And if you are so different, what then is the cause? The blood, my blood, that courses through your veins? Or the years you spent with your wean mother?" Zak threw an arm across his eyes and considered the many questions. Drizzt was different from the norm, he decided at length, but he didn't know whether he should thank Vierna or himself. After a while, sleep took him, but it brought the weapons master little comfort. A familiar dream visited him, a vivid memory that would never fade. Zaknafein heard again the screams of the children of House Devere as the Do'Urden soldiers he himself had trained, slashed at them. "This one is different!" Zak cried, leaping up from his bed. He wiped the cold sweat from his face. This one is different. He had to believe that. And there we go. That is the end of tonight's chapter and the end of our readings for this week. So, I will be back on Monday with our next part. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and everybody stays safe and healthy. And I'll see you on Monday. Bye, everyone!